And now it's time for another edition of What Would Jell-O Do? What happens when the government riots? Part 6. Okay, since we ran out of time the other night when I was making parts 1 through 5, now I can update things a little. And the gut punch I felt when they were talking about sicking dogs on people and the military firing on people, wondering, and of course, Asian provocateurs and inside agitators trying to make things worse. I was hoping, oh my God, I know how bad Trump and Bannon and his monster children and Stephen Miller and the rest of them, Barr especially, would like to go full Pinochet on everybody, but maybe they won't do it after all, since now not one but 3 defense secretaries, including the current one, is saying, look, this is not the way the army is supposed to be used, Donald, Your Highness. But I've been saving this one because a lot of the reason I got that gut punch was from the dogs and from the shooting is because of how deeply torn up inside I am to this day about what happened at Kent State University almost exactly 50 years ago, May 4th, 1970. I was in 6th grade and seeing the paper the night before, 4 students killed at a demonstration in Kent State University in Ohio. Then the next day, my 6th grade teacher is trying to get us interested in affairs of the world from a conservative angle, praised the guardsmen, and I just burned inside, telling myself this will not stand. Not for me. Not now, not ever. This will not stand. It tore a lot of people up. Then a few years later, there was a made-for-TV movie about it that actually was pretty good as far as made-for-TV movies goes. And I think me and my younger sister Julie were the only ones in the house, and we were watching it because I don't remember my parents being there. And at the end, as you see the bodies and that people died, that Alison Krauss died, Jeffrey Miller died, Sandra Scheuer died, William Schroeder, who was an ROTC cadet, Reserve Officers Training Corps, on his way to class. He was also on the basketball team. He was gunned down. None of the people killed were actual protesters, but my sister, who was younger and got along with my parents and the rest of the world a lot better than I did, so I wasn't sure how hip she really was about these things or how much she was even cared, but she just lost it. Broke down, could not stop crying. I held her and told her the best we can do is promise ourselves to never, ever, ever let this happen again, ever. And sure enough, we're right on the cusp of it happening again. Even right near Kent in Columbus, Ohio, apparently on May 30th, a woman, what was her name? Sandra Grossman, 22, died from an asthma attack or something after being tear gassed. Reports are still sketchy and mysterious, but this is exactly what we don't want happening ever again. Not to her, not to anybody. Of all people, who was right there when the shots were fired and barely missed him because the shots were going over his head, was Jerry Casale, future member of Devo. Yes, Devo came out of Kent State. They all started Devo there long before there was a punk or a new wave scene that would give anybody doing this kind of stuff that they were doing, including the movies with Bougie Boy and whatnot, the time of day. But this article in The Veteran, which is the paper from Vietnam Veterans Against the War, still active, trying to help people who've never quite come back from that war and others of future wars and avoiding more wars. This was written by Laurel Krauss, Alison Krauss's sister. On the afternoon of May 4th, 1970, as a 15-year-old, I was walking home from my junior high school, middle school, bus stop. A neighbor met me advising me that Allison had been hurt and suggested I phone my parents, who both worked. Within hours, we were driving to ID Allison's lifeless body on a hospital gurney, not far from Kent State, where we heard armed soldiers right there in the hospital mutter to us, quote, "They should have shot more." Jerry wrote a long thing, recommended reading for Rolling Stone, easy to click on if you go to rollingstone.com, about his own experiences at Kent State and how deeply it has affected him to this day. This is from Jerry. Ohio Governor Jim Rhodes sent the National Guard onto the campus Saturday, May 2nd, as rumors swirled about a campus uprising that he implies hadn't really happened yet. That night, perhaps annoyed that the Guard was on their campus, rolling around in their Jeeps and everything else, students burned down the ROTC building on campus, where William Schroeder was in Reserve Officers Training Corps. These people, because as Governor Rhodes said, just moved from one campus to the other and terrorized the community. Sound familiar? They're worse than the brown shirts, read terrorists, and the communist element, and also the night riders and the vigilantes. They're the worst type of people that we harbor in America. Does this sound familiar? Now I want to say this. They are not going to take over the campus. No, I and my little National Guard army are going to take over the campus instead. And then, right around then, the news had come out, and this is where the protests erupted. The news that Nixon, still the most divisive president in my lifetime, even more than Trump still, broke the news, or that the news broke that Nixon had expanded the Vietnam War into Cambodia. That wasn't supposed to happen. He said he was going to end the war. Little did we know till later he'd had troops in there for months and months and months. And, there were some people trying to fight and tussle. This is how the ROTC building got torched. I don't, Jerry, believe that it was members of the SDS, Students for Democratic Society, that did that. It would almost make you believe there were undercover operatives that started the fire. Sound familiar? To discredit the SDS and make them look dangerous and give the people what they wanted, an excuse to go after students. It was Governor Rhodes, unbeknownst to us, who conspired with the dean at Kent State University to house the National Guard in buildings on Sunday night so they'd be ready to pounce at the protest that everybody knew was coming. The students weren't hiding this protest. The plan was to declare martial law just before the protest, blindside the students, and sucker punch them. We gathered at noon. It was down a little bowl of grassy knoll going up to where it eventually went down. And, somebody was speaking. Howie Emmer, most prominent activist, was speaking when we all became aware the cavalry was coming in. Here comes the National Guard. Some were on foot, some were in jeeps, some were in transport vehicles with a canopy on it. They were coming in from 2-3 directed at once, coming in, coordinated, swooping in on peaceful anti-war protesters. We couldn't turn around and go off campus. We had to go up the hill. The only escape route was going up the hill. The National Guard were wearing gas masks, and they had M1 rifles and bayonets, and they start shooting tear gas. We were scurrying up the hill because I knew I could possibly get out by going through the student/teacher parking lot that was on the other side of the journalism building, which was down a smaller grassy knoll. You could clearly see the difference in the cluster of students between who were the ones actively in the protest and who were at the edges of the hill and out on the edge of the building just watching us as spectators. Oh, more of them parked on the other student-teacher parking lot on the other side, waiting for us to get out. We were trapped. I turned around and looked back up the hill, the smaller hill, and there they are. They came up the hill, and they amassed there. Saw somebody in charge yelling at those 2 lines of National Guardsmen. Then he made a hand gesture. That is when they started shooting. Not one losing his cool. They all started shooting. I turn around and see a guy on his belly on the road. People are starting to gather around, and there's blood running out of his head and neck area. The blood is glistening in the noon sun. I realize it's Jeff Miller, one of the students Jerry mentored when Jeff and Allison Krauss were freshmen, and he was a little older, and that was his work-study job, was to orient him into campus and stuff. I get sick to my stomach, says Jerry, and I feel like I'm going to pass out. I sat down on the grass. 30 seconds later, I realize there are people screaming, Allison! Allison! I can't really see her, but I see these people hovering around somebody laying on her back in the student-teacher parking lot, not moving. That turned out to be Allison Krauss. You got to understand, the people shooting are the same age as the people they just killed. They are all standing there freaked. They aren't moving either. They realize what they've done. Oh, let's see. Later on, he tried to get out of there and go to graduate school elsewhere, University of Michigan, Ann Arbor. But because I was a member of the SDS after the killing of Kent State, the governors of 4 states, including Michigan, made a pact. And the governor of Michigan, by the way, was Mitt Romney's father, George Romney, made a pact that all out-of-state students that were members of any radical group would lose their scholarships and be denied admission. Just like still today, people who don't register for the draft have a real hard time getting student aid from the feds or housing or anything. They developed this kind of theory, pushed by Nixon and Vice President Spiro Agnew, that it was, ready for this one, outside agitators who had corrupted and polluted these good cloistered Midwestern students at the universities in the Midwest. It stirred the pot. You kill a few students, and that really works. The activists left town or went into hiding or got hardened and joined the Weather Underground. Other kids cut their hair and went to work for their dads, who had been bugging them to get it together. Kent State killed the movement. There, I disagree. I think that it actually, those people who were murdered by our government, not just Kent State, but Jackson State, 2 more in Mississippi shortly thereafter, 2 more at Southern University in Louisiana about year and a half later after that, the fall of 72. That spooked enough people right up into the Nixon administration that it helped put an end to the Vietnam War. Enough blowback for Kent State alone, they realized we can't do this again. This is really getting out of hand, and this country is turning into everything we sent 50,000 Americans to die for to prevent Vietnam from turning into, even though the dictator we supported was doing that himself. Yeah, so this has always been one of the big ones with me that I have a hard time even talking about it, but now I have to because we are almost at that point thanks to a bloodthirsty wannabe dictator named Donald J. Trump-a-muck. Anyway, around, maybe, I don't know, 01, 02, somewhere in there, I was part of this group called the Spitfire Tour, who went around doing little shorter spoken word pieces. It would be me, maybe Michael Franti, who was a really good host, Chris Novoselic from Nirvana, who sadly put out a tweet supporting Trump's actions in D.C. Chris, what has happened? We were in Seattle together on the other side. What happened? That's happened to a lot of people over the years. Just look what happened to some of the 60s people, and not all of them, though. Not all. But anyway, and sometimes right-wing people like that MTV VJ Kennedy, who talked about the urgent need to privatize Social Security, and then in her breakout room had somebody from the Cato Institute with her. Her reward is she's now part of Fox News. Surprise, surprise. And many interesting people would go in and out I'd never meet otherwise. Really powerful woman from the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force, whose name I'm spacing on. Woody Harrelson did a couple of them. John Trudell was there. And anyway, we did one at Kent State. And I was met ahead of time by a guy I've become very close friends with named Roy Skellinger, who was 12 at the time of the massacre. His brother saw the whole thing and I guess ran home and got Roy or something. And Roy said he was there within minutes. So he slowly but surely walked me through the whole thing because he felt I needed to know. And so did I. So we started at the bowl, the grassy bowl down below, and walked up the hill. And then we were right where the guardsman fired. And still there is that student-teacher parking lot. Still there because all the attempts, just like paving over People's Park in Berkeley, have failed due to uprisings over that. Make a new thing for the football team called the Golden Flashes, which is kind of ironic. Whatever. But no, only in 1997, 27 years later, was it finally designated a National Historic Site, and the 4 parking spaces were Alison Krauss and Jeffrey Miller and William Schroeder and Sandra Scheuer died, all 4 of those parking places. And now blocked off in yellow with some special lights on each corner so you can't park there anymore. So fired up, I talked a bit and added that in when I talked to the Kent State students for the Spitfire show. And I was astonished at how many people stared at me with blank faces, having no idea this had ever happened, let alone a mere few yards from where we were on their own campus. Where have you been, people? Wake up! So then, maybe even the same year, Roy got back to me and brought me back for the whatever the anniversary was in 2003. That would be the 33rd, would it not? And it was going to be a wild one because 2003, Bush had gone into Iraq and it wasn't going very well. And the anti-war movement at that point was going pretty well with a lot of nonviolent direct action in the streets. Some of it diluted later by people who tried to derail the whole thing into a big 9/11 conspiracy freak out thing. Which kind of pulled the rug out from the whole anti-war movement eventually as those divisions started. Gee, thanks. But anyway, this was the first one since Bush went in, so the anti-war people were on fire, as was the current governor of Ohio. Cops were back in, apparently some were National Guard, and first thing of the day was the annual memorial service and remembrance for the people who died that I was one of the people asked to speak at. That was kind of a nail biter, trying to do, no sick Biafra humor at this one, because the parents of some of those victims and the relatives come every year for this. And they were there. And then a little bit farther away was the actual gathering speakers for the protest. What do you know? Sharpshooters on the roofs. What did they think we were going to do? After all that, was Al-Qaeda actually going to show up there, or other outside agitators? They had sharpshooters on the roof, and we were down below and could have been picked off, but we crossed our fingers, thought, no, they're not going to do this again. A lot of people never thought the National Guard would have live rounds in their guns, but obviously that was planned ahead of time, and the guardsmen knew it. Anyway, so a few people talked, and then I talked on this tower they built that was so flimsy that people were trying to hold it in the wind. It was about 15 feet tall to keep it from falling over. As I was standing there, not half as nervous about the sharpshooters and the police as I was that the whole thing was going to fall. So it was like trying to surf this whole thing the whole time, but it worked. So then, a little bit later on, was the Biafra spoken word show. Had my own this time at it was called the Lasar Law Building or something like that. I wrote it down on the wrong sheet of paper, it appears. And so I'm back trying to get my show together and come out the way I usually do these spoken word shows with little shades on and the evil robe, sometimes a pope's hat or something. We interrupt this program with a special bulletin. America is now under martial law. You know that one. Message from our sponsor, which Ice-T retitled Shut Up, Be Happy when he sampled the version off of No More Cocoons, looped it with a Black Sabbath riff for the Shut Up, Be Happy, or not Shut Up, Be Happy, but Freedom of Speech, Just Watch What You Say, Ice-T album. And I've re-recorded it recently and posted it at AT for the new COVID-19 era. Stay in your homes, after all. Things like that. Anyway, I walk out, and sure enough, martial law. There were people sitting in the chairs, the audience. It got bigger later, but there was a few there, including my now ex-girlfriend's conservative mother and stuff, who had never seen anything like this in her life. But lining the back wall, here and there, were various kinds of police who kind of, well, I'm not going to shut up now. They're either going to take me away or they're not. So on went the show, and they walked up and down, and they eventually left. And then throughout the show, every once in a while you see people running because the back doors were open for people to leave into the main area of this building, and people running. The cops were chasing them. Things like some people even came in and went back out again, and it was just that kind of a time that we don't really want to get back to, but boy, are we close. Back to Jerry Casale. Looking at things now, I think we're much worse off as a country than we were back then. More information was getting to the public unfiltered than it does now. We supposedly live in a, quote, information digital highway that's wide open, but it's all bullshit. Maybe not all. I'm on the internet too, and so are you, Jerry. We're not bullshit, I hope, but I see the point. Back to Jerry. It's all controlled and disinformation. Everybody believes what they want. They're all in their own private Idaho. They all have their own reality bubble. What's happened in 50 years? The right wing may have lost the culture wars because they didn't look cool, and the hippies thought they won with groovy music festivals like Woodstock. Everyone thought they were so cool. Well, the right-wingers took that rejection on a cultural level, and they built that anger and resentment inside them, and they stayed at the table, and they didn't give up. As I alluded to, and I believe in part 4 of this series, on their being so hell-bent to this day to get revenge on the 60s. Speaking of Kent State, there were attempts to go after the governor and even the guard through civil rights lawsuits, but none of them actually worked. And now they think James Rhodes was such a great, cool governor, there's a statue of him in front of the Ohio State Capitol building. However, the artist commissioned to do the statue wrote the names of the 4 people who were murdered inside James Rhodes' statue. Got to get your digs in somehow. Back to Jerry. The bad apples took over the barrel. It is corrupt to the core. A kakistocracy, which is government by the worst possible, most incompetent people. I didn't know what it meant either till I got this hardcore 7-inch by a South Carolina band called Kakistocracy and thought it was really good. Outstandingly good, actually. But what does this mean? Jerry, there is no power to meet that power. The Democrats are completely compromised because they've been taken over by their own brand of plutocrats, and they are beholden to donors. The media quit doing its job. It's bought off and compromised. The students that are being churned out by the education system don't have any critical thinking skills. That's been bred out of them. Well, Jerry has also said that The people who are so dumb they follow Trump, and now so damn dumb they think it's some kind of rebellious uprising to refuse to wear masks when we're trying to get people to not get sick and follow simple common sense. Well, remember de-evolution? De-evolution is actually happening, and now they're running the show. Are we not men? We are Devo, Jocko Homo, the new subhuman species, Homo standing for Homo sapiens. Yes, this. Devo believed it was actually true at the time, and they're right. I mean, the same people kept showing up at Dead Kennedy shows in Southern California, all blonde and tan, their eyes kind of half awake, sometimes using a racial slur to describe our drummer, even though they were trying to compliment him on how well he played just because they didn't know any better. I called them the Flintstone children. You know, they all reminded me of Pebbles and Bam Bam, and their vocabulary consists of gimme, and fuck you. The Flintstone children have Flintstone children of their own, some of them grandchildren, and horrifyingly, a lot of them vote. Jerry, watch what happens in the next year. It's over for the rule of law. It's over for women's rights. The racial and ethnic hate will be pumped up beyond belief, and nobody is going to stick up for you. Roe v. Wade will be gone. It's going to be one ugly right-wing country unless we keep fighting back so consistently and so hard that even corporate-controlled Cartoon McNews is now showing every last video they can get of the cops going crazy on people and coming down against the cops. Even that alone is huge, and that's where we've got to keep fighting every way we can to keep exactly what Jerry is warning about from coming any more true than it already is.